Let's welcome in on the show Mr. Parthasarathy Shome, Chairman at the GAAR panel. He joins us from New Delhi. Mr. Shome, hi, good morning. Firstly, what has been the thinking behind asking for a 3-year deferral? Why does India need a 3-year time frame for GAAR implementation?
Well, the committee believed that for introducing an instrument which is so much like a precision instrument, such as GAAR, which is an overarching tax deterrence instrument, unlike the SAR, which are specific anti-avoidance rules, which actually have already identified what is the source of anti-avoidance, and you can go into it. GAAR is an overarching deterrence instrument, and for that you need tremendous training, I would say, experience. Most countries allow long-term involvement of tax officials in this particular area for specialization in international taxation. So we felt that on the one hand, it would be a good idea to give tax administration to prepare appropriately in this kind of an internationally advanced tax instrument that would be available to them. On the other side, we felt that taxpayers or stakeholders would also have to get used to the concept of a new anti-avoidance regime, and for that it is better to give some time to them, if they know how long they have, in order to reorganize their businesses, which would be less of an avoidance kind of arrangement. And so on both sides, I think that as long as we know when we are introducing it, as long as we introduce a certainty element in GAAR, there is need for a little time for full preparation on both sides.
Mr. Shome, do you think investor sentiment will be revived because of your recommendations?
I certainly hope so. I think that our finance minister is chalking out his own program, and I hope that this committee's report will assist him, and it will be a spoke in his wheel in terms of progressive investment. I certainly hope, and of course, I mean, looking at the provisions, I knew that it would be sort of investor oriented automatically almost, because once we corrected and modified some of the GAAR provisions, we were moving towards investor orientation.
So, Mr. Shome, let's turn to specifics. You've said that abolish capital gains tax and transfer of all listed securities. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, first and foremost, you know, at a relatively low cost in terms of revenue, we could compare ourselves with the rest of the world. Many countries that are now internationalized, and that appears in Annex 6 of the report, have 0% tax on capital gains on listed securities. So that was the first point. That, I mean, if we are really again talking about internationalizing our tax structure, then that is what we need. Second, if we do that, then there's all this issue of some other country having a capital gains tax, and through our treaty with us, their investors are escaping or avoiding capital gains in India, and do we have a right over their capital gains and so on, where the assets are located in India. Those are kind of minimized and they vanish, and it's a very, in that case, once we look at it from that point of view, we have solved the problem right away and straight away. And then, in addition, we felt that it should not be just for non-residents, but we felt it should be for residents as well, because if you want tax neutrality, you probably should treat both of them so that in the same way, and so that residents can themselves also think of investments in the right manner, and those companies that are doing the investment through holding and all that, they will probably then come to India and be able to operate. And what we are saying is that you shouldn't lose revenue. You can have a slight twitching in the STT, in the security transaction tax, to get that revenue to begin with.
So, Mr. Shome, by when are you suggesting that capital gains tax should be abolished from the next budget, or when GAAR is actually implemented?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. It's kind of, the two are separable, because even if one sort of abolishes the capital gains tax as we have it today, then some of the issues with our treaty partners will disappear immediately. But at least it should be introduced with the time when we are doing GAAR, what we are saying. But I think I would urge and hope that it can be done as soon as possible.
Mr. Shome, you've suggested Singapore and Mauritius investors should be spared from GAAR. Isn't that route often exploited, and won't that limit the scope of GAAR then?
In the fine print of the report, what we've said is that as long as we have treaties, we should not be going into treaty override, because that is one of the most egregious steps to take against a treaty, because that is what takes a long time to negotiate with a particular country, and the country's investors and our investors into those countries go by those treaty agreements, and they take long-term decisions. So we cannot abrogate, treaties in that fashion. So what we've said is, as long as the treaty exists, the tax resident certificate in the case of Mauritius and the LOB, the limitation of benefits in the case of Singapore, should continue, because they are part of the treaty. Even the LOB was added into Singapore, and so therefore, and they have operated with the tax resident certificate since 2000. So there is no sort of critical mass of rationale in a treaty sense, in a taxation, international taxation sense, to abrogate treaties like that. Instead, like some countries have done, one can take a re-look at the treaty. That we have, I think, mentioned. I don't think we took that away from the final report. I think that may be a revisit, and looking at it should be done. That is very hard work. But then, just because that is hard work, we cannot come around in some other direction in an inappropriate manner.
Mr. Shome, why are you suggesting that GAAR should be invoked at TDA stage instead of final assessment, because that will only make it provisional?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it was a hard decision for us, because in general, what we are saying is that GAAR will be invoked at the stage of assessment, and also there are many steps whereby GAAR can be invoked. I mean, many steps have to be passed before GAAR can be invoked, from the assessing officer to the commissioner to the approving panel and so on. But this is a particular case where we are saying that TDS, when you are, for example, remitting abroad, a TDS is incurred, but suppose that the TDS is not incurred appropriately, and then when you say GAAR at the time of assessment in the next year or two, at that time the receiver of the remittance is not there anymore. So the remitter has to provide some kind of certification that, well, if GAAR does arise at the point of the assessment and so on, it is not that GAAR is being brought forward, but if GAAR arises during the period of assessment, then the remitter is taking the obligation that, yes, that correction in the case of GAAR, that responsibility is being taken. So it is a point, at the point of remittance, the remitter is giving a kind of guarantee rather than saying that GAAR itself is being applied.
So what is the rationale behind the 3 crore rupees threshold level as well?
Okay. The 3 crore threshold was that, in order to really completely move away from the objective or even the seeming objective of revenue maximization through GAAR, the point was that GAAR should be narrowed down to cases where there is relatively high profit before tax, PBT, and which we will measure from the tax point, which is the tax benefit. So if 3 crore is the tax benefit that under an arrangement a business would enjoy, what that would imply if the, let's say, tax rate is 30% approximately, or the effective tax rate is around, let's say, 20, 24, 25%, what we are saying is that therefore that implies in the background PBT or profit before tax around 10 crore. And that is, we then looked at how many companies in India actually declare a PBT of 10 crore or above, and there are not that many, and therefore to begin with, tax officers can also focus on big cases of high profit before tax and high potential tax benefit through this arrangement. So in a way, it is an administrative measure which gives a strong hand to the tax officials not to be bogged down with small cases, and second, to ensure that the small businesses who are coming from abroad or from home, they are not bogged down with regular cases of GAAR.
Mr. Shome, now GAAR is an important chapter of DTC. You've asked for a 3-year deferral of GAAR. So what happens to DTC now?
Oh yes, I think so, because in the direct tax code itself it can be announced that GAAR will be implemented from this year. That is, there is no conflict in that, as in many countries it happens. And the direct tax code is a much bigger overarching attempt at reforming our our income taxation on the whole. GAAR is just the opposite. It's a very kind of almost like a laser surgery in the entire body of direct tax code. So GAAR, and there are different points within the direct tax code such as this one. And so this could be looked at within the direct tax code, but that doesn't stop the direct tax code to be implemented, or for within the direct tax code for it to be said that this particular aspect will come from 16-17 with assessment year 17-18.
Mr. Shome, how significant is the fact that in the new terms of reference for your committee, it now includes all non-resident residents as well instead of just FIIs?
That I think is a significant thing, because it's what we would call indirect transfers from one source to the other, to another, but the underlying assets are in India, but all of the sort of operations including the purchase and sale of those assets are abroad. So does India have a right to tax that kind of transfer? I mean, this issue arose from many years ago, but I think for a final look, for a final examination, and then to come to some salient conclusions, we do need some time, very careful examination of it. We have already had a lot of input from stakeholders. I do know the view also from the official view on this. So I think that we have to really look at it in a kind of independent manner from just the GAAR matter. So that's our next challenge and task, and again at a very short notice and very short period of time.
Mr. Shome, lovely to have you on ET Now, and thank you for clarifying all our questions and all our queries.